Hey everybody, I'm going to try to do a PowerPoint here for you guys for the first time. So, haven't probably heard my voice in a while. So this is take two actually, because the first take I forgot to tell my wife I was doing this, and I'm in my bedroom, and she flushed the toilet. So I'm going to start from scratch. We're just going to do a little review at first. All right, our aim today is to understand the difference between sexual and asexual reproduction. I'm sure you had a great lesson last year from Ms. Husky, so this will just be a reminder of some things. You just recently went over human reproduction, so let's get started. Let's just first review with cell theory. Just you have to remember that cells arise from pre-existing cells. Living organisms are composed of cells. Some may be unicellular, which is one cell, or multicellular, which we are, right? We're complex and multicellular. And the cell is the basic unit of life. And those right here are the three scientists that came up with each one of these theories. So, asexual reproduction, it can happen quickly. Offspring can only have one parent. That's what the Regents really wants you to know. One parent. And you clone yourself. So you have an identical DNA. It's not always perfectly identical, and we'll get into that when we look at evolution. Sexual reproduction, you have to know that you have two parents. The process of development is slow, and the offspring is unique. And I think we talked about this in class. If you want to show your folks how unique you are, it's 2 to the 23rd power, and that doesn't include crossing over, which you guys haven't even talked about yet. Animals, you need a male gamete and a female gamete, which is just sperm and egg, which you probably learned from human reproduction. They enjoy it swims, so they need liquid environment to swim in. So, and fertilization could be external or internal. Here's an example of external fertilization. If we were in class, I would explain how it's not 100%. So those eggs could be possibly being fertilized by a frog downstream. So it happens outside the female body. Also, these eggs develop outside the female body. If you ever saw tadpoles, you know what I'm talking about. Fish and amphibians do this. So an amphibian, ambi means both, right? So it's both land and water that these species live in. You have a large number of gametes and a large number of eggs, but very, very few survivors. Here's just an example of them growing. All right, disadvantage is predators can come, currents can sweep the gametes away, etc. Internal fertilization. Fertilization occurs inside the female's body, her reproductive tract. This is a sea turtle here. I don't know if that's a hawkbill or a green turtle. If we were in class, I'd go off tangent and tell you how I studied sea turtles in college, Dermachilles coriacea. It's awesome, great, awesome experience. And then there's reptiles, birds, and mammals. All are examples of internal fertilization and external development or internal development. Obviously, you developed inside a female body. These eggs right here will develop outside the female body. And then there's fewer gametes because the risk of because fertilization has a higher chance of happening. Here's just an example of external development, right? This snake is going to leave its babies all alone. They're on land, so they're terrestrial. That's why you now have an egg that surrounds a hard shell that protects the egg. It encloses its watery environment, which it has to develop in. We talked about this. This is an example of internal fertilization. Something that you need to know is fertilization in female humans happens in the fallopian tubes or the oviduct, right? So here's the oviduct. Ova means egg, duct. This is a duct, okay? So the egg would then develop and then ovulate, oocyte. Site, remember, is code for what? Cell, very good. So means egg. It's an egg cell. It's a one cell. It's actually the largest cell in the human body. Think about it. If you eat an egg this morning and you crack it open, that's just one cell, right? And then it slowly starts to divide and the cells get smaller and smaller and smaller. Here's the advantage and disadvantages of, or the similarities between the two. Sexual reproduction, two parents, genetically different. Parents come together, their offspring are different. So you're totally unique. Remember, 2 to the 23rd power. It requires a sperm and an egg or gametes to come together, and it increases biodiversity. Bio, life, diversity, difference, right? So every person is different. Asexual reproduction, one parent, offsprings are genetically the same, so they're clones. It doesn't require gametes because you're just dividing in half, and does not increase biodiversity because you're all the same. It produces one more of its own kind. That's what they have in common. And it requires the replication of chromosomes. So which one do you think came first? Asexual reproduction or sexual reproduction? Well, the reality is we don't know, right? But we would assume it's asexual reproduction. Why? If you said because we evolved from single-cell organisms, you would be correct. But again, nobody was there. So these are all just theories based on evidence that we had in the past. So let's review what's a theory. What theory would you base your answer on? And again, we would say cell theory. So again, asexual reproduction is just one parent. So these are the different types of asexual reproduction you need to know. So if you remember mitosis from Miss Husky's class, binary fission is just a fancy way of saying mitosis, right? It's a superhero name. So fission means just to separate, two things divide. Binary means they're exactly the same size. So cells in your body practice binary fission. So what happens in binary fission? Well, just like in mitosis, you have to copy the DNA exactly. The cell divides evenly, and then you have two daughter cells. So you have a parent cell, and then you have a daughter cell. Remember prokaryote? It has circular DNA. All right, so prokaryote, and it means first, so it's basically the first cell. It just copies itself exactly. This is one of my favorite. This is known as budding. So if you ever saw Austin Powers in Mini-Me, well, that's what this thing is right here. So it duplicates itself just like in binary fission. Then all of a sudden it gets like a little pimple, and that little pimple just creates a mini-me, and that mini-me kind of jumps off. So just imagine something like a little thing growing off of your shoulder, and then boop, jumping right off. And then eventually it'll grow and be the same size as you. But the cells divide unevenly. However, the nucleus divides evenly. So that's an important point. 3 and 4 are very important points. Here's an example. This is a yeast, right? So yeast, that's kind of what makes it rise. They start to divide very quickly. And then that little thing right there, that's genetically identical. Then you have molds and ferns. They create spores. So we call it sporulation. So the spores are just specialized cells. If you have a fern in your house, you can kind of look underneath those. Those are all spores. Not to be confused with like blowing a dandelion, okay? So if you ever had a puffball, right, and you were walking in the woods and you stepped on a puffball and all those things flew out, you just helped it reproduce. Those spores go flying in the air, and they land, and they'll grow into more mold and ferns. This one's really cool. This one is regeneration. So these two examples right here are sea stars. So if you take a sea star and you cut it in half, that half will then grow into two. So like when I was a kid, clamming was huge on Long Island, and clammers hated sea stars because the sea stars would actually eat clams, right? That's why they're shaped the way they are. They would wrap around a clam and rip it apart and then eat the clam. So clammers, if they caught a sea star, they would keep an axe on their clam boat and chop that sea star in half and then throw it back into the ocean, thinking that it killed it. but now it just made 2 sea stars because eventually that other half would grow. This one right here, planaris, are really cool. We've messed with them in AP. You can cut them in all different shapes and stuff like that, and then they'll still live and then eventually grow into a full planera again. Then there's vegetative propagation. So this is where you would take there's 2 ways of doing it actually. If you have mint or spider plants, those plants that are growing from the root, right? If you pull it up, these guys right here are genetically identical to the parent plant. There's another way of doing vegetative propagation that humans can do. We could take a plant, right? We kind of like the way their roots grow, but we don't like the flowers. So we can cut the top off and then graft the other flower on there. I learned this from a florist that certain roses, if you trim them too much, the color of the flower will change. Reason being is a lot of roses that they're grafted on there, the color. So how can we take this as an advantage? Well, we could take something that we like a good tasting um, apple, and graft it on an apple tree, like a crab tree that has really good roots but doesn't grow desirable fruit. Not to be confused for cross-pollinating. Okay. So here's just an example right here. This person is just taking this little tiny branch. This branch is going to be genetically identical to its parent, but not genetically identical to the tree that it's growing on. And here's kind of another quick example. If we were in class, I would show you a little bit some more examples that take place. One example I can kind of remember, go away, is when I lived in California, in Chico, California, they grow walnut trees. Well, white walnuts make really good tasting walnuts, but don't have good roots. Black walnuts, really good roots, not good tasting walnuts. So they would graft all these white walnuts onto a black walnut tree, and you could actually see the difference between the two. You can look it up online. It's actually pretty cool. We do this with apples and stuff like that. Oh, here we go. I do have a picture. So here it is. See the black walnuts down here? Here are the white walnuts. This is a whole orchard in which they do this. Kind of fascinating. Thank you. Thank you very much. So what are the different types of asexual reproduction? You need to know sporulation, binary fission. You need to know budding. You need to know vegetative propagation, and then regeneration. We're just going to skip a couple of these things. You can maybe answer the questions on your own. All right, let's try one. Which phase best identifies asexual reproduction? All right, you're looking for one parent, no gametes. How about this one? The ability of cells to pass on their characteristics to new cells is related to the ability to replicate chromosomes, and those are chromosomes right there, replicating. Viruses frequently infect bacteria and insert new genes into the genetic material of bacteria. When these infected bacteria produce asexually, which genes would most likely be passed on? Both, believe it or not. Okay. All right, so we're going to stop there today. That's today's lesson. Tomorrow we'll talk a little bit about mitosis as it relates to sexual reproduction. I hope that was helpful. I got to figure out how to shut this thing off. There it goes. All right. You guys have a great day. Stay forward and strong.